Galactic Orphanage refused the alien girl. Then a human janitor built her a bed in the storage room. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The gleaming spires of Nexus Station hummed with the energy of 1,000 species coexisting in the heart of the Galactic Union. Here, at the crossroads of civilized space, stood the renowned Nexus Orphanage, an institution dedicated to housing displaced children from across the stars. Miles Harper had never intended to become a janitor at the most prestigious orphanage in the galaxy. At 42, with graying temples and calloused hands, he had simply needed work after his transport ship was decommissioned. As a former engineer turned maintenance worker, Miles spent his days fixing environmental controls, repairing food dispensers, and mopping floors that sparkled beneath the artificial lights. The administrators barely acknowledged his existence, and the caretakers, elegant Valdarians with their crystalline skin and superior demeanors, treated him as just another fixture of the facility. The orphanage housed children from dozens of species, each ward meticulously separated according to biological needs and compatibility. The Valdarians, with their advanced empathic abilities, were considered the galaxy's finest caregivers, which was why the Union had placed them in charge of the orphanage. Their philosophy of optimal development meant every child received precisely what they needed, nothing more, nothing less. Miles noticed the commotion while changing air filters in Corridor G. A small delegation of officials was escorting a tiny figure through the pristine hallway. Curiosity piqued. He paused his work, pretending to check his maintenance tablet as they passed. The child in their midst was unlike any species he had encountered before, no taller than his knee, with luminous green skin that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Her eyes were enormous and entirely black, and what appeared to be delicate fins protruded from her head and arms. "The council was explicit," said Administrator Zenith, the head Valdarian, her crystalline features refracting the light. "We cannot accommodate an Aquilian. Our facility lacks the proper environmental controls. This child is the sole survivor of the Aquilian colony on Nexus 9, responded a stern Union official. The attack left their habitat dome completely destroyed. She requires specialized care, which we cannot provide," Zenith replied without emotion. "Our responsibility is to the children already in our care. We cannot compromise their well-being by diverting resources to accommodate a species with such unique requirements." The little Aquilian girl made no sound, but Miles noticed how her skin had dimmed, the pulsing light growing fainter. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror after losing his wife and daughter in the Centauri plague outbreak 10 years ago. It was the vacant stare of someone who had lost everything and now faced rejection from their last hope. As the delegation continued down the hallway, Miles slipped back to his work, but he couldn't forget those enormous black eyes or the dimming light of her skin. That evening, after his shift ended, he lingered in the staff recreation area where the news feed displayed footage of the Nexus 9 attack. A rogue faction had targeted the underwater colony dome of the peaceful Aquilians, shattering their habitat and exposing them to toxic elements in the planet's atmosphere. Out of a colony of 300, only one child had survived, found floating in a sealed emergency pod. "Terrible business," said Cora, one of the few human caretakers at the facility. She was folding fresh linens as she watched the broadcast. "The poor thing. They're saying she'll be transferred to a research facility until they can locate any distant Aquilian relatives." "Research facility?" Miles frowned. "You mean a lab? She's a child, not a specimen." Cora shrugged helplessly. "The Aquilians need very specific environmental conditions. They're semi-aquatic and absorb nutrients through their skin. Standard orphanage accommodations won't work for her, and the administrators won't approve special modifications." Miles leaned against the wall, his mind working through the problem like he would a broken conduit or faulty circuit. What exactly would she need? A water immersion chamber for sleeping, specialized nutrient mists, and regulated humidity levels, Cora replied. But Administrator Zenith has already denied the request. "We're at capacity, and the budget doesn't allow for accommodating rare species. That night, Miles couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the little Aquilian's dimming skin and those hollow eyes. In his quarters, he pulled out his old engineering tablet and began researching Aquilian biology. By morning, he had a plan. The orphanage's east wing contained several storage rooms that had been converted from old quarantine chambers during the station's last renovation. These rooms still had independent environmental controls and reinforced walls, originally designed to contain airborne pathogens. Miles had access to every room as part of his maintenance duties, and room E17 had been empty for months except for broken furniture and outdated equipment. Over the next 3 days, Miles worked during his regular shifts and then returned to E17 after hours. He repurposed an old hydroponic tank, converting it into a sleeping pool. He modified the room's environmental controls to create the humid atmosphere an Aquilian needed. From discarded medical equipment, he cobbled together a nutrient misting system. On the 4th day, he learned the Aquilian child was being transferred to the research facility in the morning. That night, he took a considerable risk. Using his maintenance codes, he sliced into the orphanage's administrative system and created a falsified approval for a special accommodations trial. The document bore Administrator Zenith's electronic signature, a forgery that could cost him his job and possibly his freedom. Before dawn, Miles approached the temporary holding area where the Aquilian girl was kept. The guard, a junior Valdarian, looked up in surprise. "Maintenance," Miles said, holding up his badge. "Special transfer preparations. I have the authorization here." He transmitted the forged documents to the guard's tablet. The guard frowned slightly, crystalline features catching the light. "This is unusual timing." "Administrative oversight," Miles replied with practiced casualness. "They just realized the transfer team arrives in 2 hours, and the child needs to be prepped. You know how Zenith gets when things aren't in order." The guard nodded knowingly and stepped aside. Inside the sparse holding room, the little Aquilian sat motionless on a standard bed, her skin now a dull green with barely any luminescence. Her fins had shriveled slightly, and her enormous eyes stared at nothing. Miles approached slowly and knelt before her. "Hello," he said softly. "My name is Miles. I'm going to help you." The child didn't respond, but her eyes focused on him, the first sign she was aware of her surroundings. "I know you've lost everyone," he continued, his voice gentle. "I lost my family too, a long time ago. I'm not going to let them take you to that research facility. I've made a place for you here." He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. After a long moment, the Aquilian girl placed her tiny webbed hand in his. Her skin felt like cool, damp silk. "What's your name?" he asked. Her voice, when it came, sounded like water flowing over stones. "Naya." Miles smiled. "Nice to meet you, Naya. Let's go home." He led her through the quiet corridors of the orphanage, using his knowledge of the security patterns to avoid detection. When they reached room E17, he keyed in his code, and the door slid open. Inside, the room had been transformed. The hydroponic tank now formed a small pool filled with purified water and the proper mineral content. The walls glistened with controlled humidity. A misting system released gentle puffs of nutrient-rich vapor at regular intervals. Miles had even salvaged some bioluminescent panels to create a soft, underwater-like glow. Naya's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Her skin brightened instantly, pulsing with renewed energy. Her fins unfurled, and her enormous eyes widened. She made a sound that Miles couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between a gasp and a song. "It's not perfect," he said apologetically, "but it should meet your basic needs until we can make something better." Naya approached the pool cautiously, dipping one webbed hand into the water. She turned to Miles, and for the first time, he saw her smile, a strange, beautiful expression that caused the luminescence in her skin to form patterns like stars. "Home?" she asked, the words sounding both like a question and a hope. Miles nodded. "Yes, Naya. Home." The next morning, chaos erupted in the orphanage when the transfer team arrived to find the Aquilian child missing. Security protocols were activated, and a station-wide alert was issued. Miles went about his regular duties, heart pounding but expression neutral as guards rushed past him. By midday, Administrator Zenith called an emergency staff meeting. Her crystalline features were rigid with barely contained fury. The Aquilian child has been abducted, she announced. Security footage shows someone using maintenance codes to access her temporary quarters. All maintenance staff will be questioned immediately. Miles stood at the back of the room, knowing discovery was inevitable. But before Zenith could continue, the doors to the conference room slid open, and Union Overseer Talia Blake strode in. Blake was the highest-ranking human in the Nexus administrative hierarchy, responsible for ensuring all Union facilities adhered to interspecies ethics codes. Administrator Zenith, Blake said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. I've received some very disturbing information about your handling of the Aquilian survivor. Zenith's crystalline features hardened further. Overseer Blake, we are currently dealing with a security breach. The child has been relocated to appropriate accommodations, Blake interrupted, under my direct authorization. A murmur ran through the assembled staff. Miles felt his stomach drop. How had Blake discovered his actions so quickly? I received an anonymous report, Blake continued, activating a holographic display that showed the makeshift accommodations Miles had created in room E17. Someone in your facility took it upon themselves to create suitable living conditions for the Aquilian child after you refused to do so. I arrived this morning to find the child healthier and more responsive than she has been since the rescue. Blake turned to face the entire staff. The Galactic Union Orphan Protection Act clearly states that all orphan children, regardless of species, must be provided with appropriate care. Administrator Zenith's refusal to accommodate this child's needs constitutes a direct violation of that act. Zenith's crystalline skin had taken on a reddish hue, a sign of embarrassment or anger in Vuldarians. The accommodations in room E17 are makeshift and unauthorized. They do not meet safety standards and were created without proper approval. On the contrary, Blake replied, my engineers have examined the modifications and found them to be ingenious and perfectly adequate for temporary housing. In fact, they exceed the standards that would have been provided at the research facility. She turned to address the room again. I want to know who is responsible for these modifications. Not for punishment, but for commendation. A heavy silence fell over the room. Miles stood frozen, uncertain whether to come forward. The consequences of his actions, the forgery, the unauthorized access, could still result in serious penalties, despite Blake's apparent approval of the outcome. Before he could decide, a small voice spoke from the doorway. Miles, help me. All heads turned to see Naya standing there, her green skin glowing brightly, fins fully extended. Beside her stood Cora, the human caretaker, looking both nervous and proud. I brought her, Cora explained quickly. She wanted to see what was happening. Naya walked into the room, her movements fluid and graceful despite being out of water. She stopped in front of Miles and took his hand. Miles made home for me. The room erupted in whispers. Blake approached them, her expression unreadable. She knelt to Naya's level. Did Miles help you? She asked gently. Naya nodded, her skin pulsing with light patterns. Everyone said no. Miles said yes. Blake rose and faced Miles directly. Is this true, Mr. Harper? He supplied. Miles Harper. And yes, it's true. I couldn't let her go to that research facility. She's a child, not a specimen. You falsified authorization documents, Zenith interjected sharply. You abused your maintenance access. Yes, Miles admitted. I did what was necessary when proper channels failed. Blake studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Mr. Harper, your actions, while unorthodox, demonstrate the very spirit of the Orphan Protection Act. The fact that a maintenance worker had to take such measures, however, reflects a serious failure of leadership in this facility. She turned to Zenith. Administrator, effective immediately, I am placing the Nexus Orphanage under review. Furthermore, I am authorizing a new specialized care unit for children with unique biological needs to be established within this facility. Zenith's crystalline features froze in shock. Overseer Blake, This is highly irregular. What's irregular? Blake interrupted. Is denying care to an orphan child because her needs were inconvenient. The Union Council will receive my full report on this matter. The meeting was dismissed, but Blake asked Miles and Naya to remain. Once they were alone, her official demeanor softened. That was quite a risk you took, Mr. Harper. Miles nodded, still holding Naya's hand. I know, but it was the right thing to do. Indeed it was, Blake agreed. Which is why I'd like to offer you a position. Miles blinked in surprise. A position? As supervisor of the new specialized care unit, Blake explained. Your engineering background, combined with your compassion, makes you uniquely qualified. We need someone who sees possibilities where others see problems. Miles looked down at Naya, whose skin was pulsing with patterns he was beginning to recognize as happiness. What about Naya? Legally, she remains a ward of the orphanage, Blake said. But under the new unit, you would be her primary caretaker. Naya's grip on his hand tightened. Miles felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose, of belonging. He thought of his own daughter, who would never grow up, and the second chance he was being offered. I accept, he said simply. Blake nodded, satisfied. Good. There's much work to be done, but for now, I suggest you and Naya return to your improvised quarters. I'll have my team begin upgrading the facilities immediately. As they walked back to room E17, Naya's skin glowed brighter than Miles had yet seen. She looked up at him, those enormous black eyes reflecting the corridor lights. Family? She asked tentatively. Miles felt his throat tighten. Yes, Naya. Family. That night, as Naya slept peacefully in her makeshift pool, Miles sat beside it, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. The soft glow of her skin illuminated the room, casting dancing patterns on the walls. He thought about the chain of events that had brought them together. His decommissioned ship, the janitor position no one else wanted, being in the right corridor at the right moment. Sometimes, Miles reflected, the universe had a strange way of putting broken pieces back together. He had lost a family and found a purpose. Naya had lost everything and found a home. And tomorrow, they would begin building something new, not just a specialized care unit, but a future neither of them had imagined possible. The next 6 months transformed the East Wing of the Nexus Orphanage beyond recognition. Under Overseer Blake's authority, Room E17 expanded into a full specialized care unit that occupied the entire floor. Miles, now officially the unit's supervisor, oversaw the construction of habitats designed for species with requirements outside standard orphanage provisions. Naya's quarters evolved from a repurposed storage room into a beautiful aquatic living space with crystal-clear pools, living coral, and sophisticated atmospheric controls that perfectly replicated her native environment. More importantly, she was no longer alone. The new unit had already welcomed 5 other children whose species had previously been deemed too difficult to accommodate. A Methanian who breathed nitrogen instead of oxygen, twin Lemurians who required intense ultraviolet light, a young Draconis whose volcanic body temperature would have overwhelmed standard environmental systems, and a Sylvan child who needed to root in soil during sleep cycles. Administrator Zenith, still smarting from the Union's review, maintained a frosty distance from the specialized care unit. The rest of the orphanage continued under her crystalline supervision, run with the same clinical efficiency as before. But word had spread through official channels about the new accommodations at Nexus, and more non-standard species were being referred to the orphanage. Miles sat in his new office, reviewing applications for additional staff. Cora had immediately volunteered to transfer to the unit, bringing her experience as a caretaker along with her genuine warmth. Now they needed specialists in xenobiology and adaptive engineering. Miles. Naya's melodic voice preceded her as she burst into his office, her green skin pulsing with excitement. At 10 Earth years old, she had grown several inches over the past months, her fins now more pronounced and elegantly flowing behind her as she moved. The Draconis egg is hatching. Miles jumped up from his desk. This was a momentous occasion, the first new arrival to be born directly into their care. They had received the egg 3 weeks ago after its parent was killed in an asteroid mining accident. Thank you for letting me know, Naya. Let's go see our newest resident, he said, following her quick, fluid movements down the corridor. The incubation chamber was crowded with staff and children alike, all maintaining a respectful distance from the glowing volcanic egg. Its obsidian surface had developed a network of molten cracks, pulsing with orange light from within. Cora stood closest to the egg, monitoring its vitals on a specialized scanner. Temperature holding steady at 1,200 degrees Celsius, she reported. Heartbeat strong and regular. Miles felt a small webbed hand slip into his. Naya pressed against his side, her enormous black eyes fixed on the egg. Is it a boy or girl? She whispered. We don't know yet, Miles replied. Draconis gender isn't determined until after hatching. A louder crack split the air, and a small section of the obsidian shell fell away. A tiny clawed hand, glowing like metal fresh from a forge, emerged from the opening. The assembled spectators collectively held their breath. Come on, little one, Cora encouraged softly. You can do it. With another forceful crack, the egg split entirely, revealing a small dragon-like creature with scales that shifted between deep red and bright orange. Its eyes opened, brilliant yellow with vertical pupils, and it surveyed the room with an intelligence that belied its newborn status. The infant Draconis opened its mouth and released a small jet of flame, then made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a roar. Welcome to the family, Miles said, smiling broadly. Later that evening, after the newly hatched Draconis had been settled into its habitat, Miles found Naya sitting by her pool, unusually quiet. Her skin had dimmed to a soft glow, which he had learned indicated contemplation or concern. What's on your mind, Starfish? He asked, using the nickname he had given her months ago. Naya looked up, her enormous eyes reflecting the bioluminescent lights. The new teachers don't like us, she said simply. Miles frowned. The expansion of the unit had necessitated bringing in educational specialists from across the Union. Most had integrated well, but a few had shown reluctance to adapt their teaching methods to the unique needs of their students. Which teachers? He asked, sitting beside her. Professor Telix and Instructor Vreen, Naya replied. They talk about us when they think we can't hear. They called us biological anomalies and said the resources spent on our unit could support 10 times as many standard children. Miles felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same he had felt when Administrator Zenith had rejected Naya. Did they say anything directly to you? Naya's fins drooped slightly. Professor Telix said I shouldn't be in advanced mathematics because Aquilians aren't known for computational skills. But I like numbers, Miles. They make patterns like my skin. Miles nodded, making a mental note to address this immediately. You're excellent at mathematics, Naya. Your species doesn't determine what you can learn or achieve. Why do some people think it does? She asked, her voice small. Miles considered his answer carefully. Some people are comfortable with clear categories. It makes the universe seem more orderly and predictable. When someone or something doesn't fit their categories, it challenges their understanding of how things should be. Naya absorbed this, her skin pulsing thoughtfully. Like how the Voldarians think everyone should develop according to their optimal pathway. Exactly, Miles said, impressed by her insight. But people aren't machinery with predetermined functions. We're complex and constantly evolving. Even humans? Naya asked. Miles laughed. Especially humans. We're probably the most contradictory species in the galaxy. The next morning, Miles called a staff meeting. All 12 members of the Specialized Care Unit team gathered in the conference room, including the 2 educators Naya had mentioned. I've called this meeting to address some concerns about our educational approach, Miles began. It has come to my attention that certain assumptions are being made about our children's capabilities based on species stereotypes. Professor Telix, a tall centaurian with an exoskeleton that clicked when he was uncomfortable, shifted in his seat. Supervisor Harper, with all due respect, there are well-documented neurological differences between species. It's not stereotyping to acknowledge biological reality. I agree, Miles replied calmly. But there's a difference between understanding biological differences and imposing limitations. Each child here has already defied expectations simply by surviving circumstances that would have broken many adults. He activated a holographic display showing the academic progress of each child in the unit. Naya shows exceptional aptitude for mathematics and spatial reasoning. The Lemurian twins have advanced linguistic capabilities beyond their age group. The Sylvan child has demonstrated remarkable insights in biological sciences. Miles let the data speak for itself before continuing. Our job isn't to fit these children into predetermined categories, but to help them discover and develop their unique potential. Instructor Vreen, a reptilian saurian with iridescent scales, leaned forward. Your commitment to these children is admirable, Supervisor Harper. But resources are finite. The specialized equipment, the environmental modifications, the individualized curricula, all of this for a handful of children when standard accommodations could serve many more. Miles had anticipated this argument. Instructor Vreen, would you apply the same cost-benefit analysis to children of your own species? The room fell silent. Vreen's scales flushed a deeper color. That's not the same, isn't it? Miles interrupted. The Orphan Protection Act doesn't include a clause about resource efficiency. It states that all orphan children deserve care appropriate to their needs. Theory and practice often diverge, Professor Telex commented. The union's ideals are commendable, but practically speaking. The door to the conference room slid open, interrupting Telex mid-sentence. Administrator Zenith entered, her crystalline features catching the light. The room immediately tensed. Zenith rarely visited the specialized care unit. Administrator, Miles acknowledged, hiding his surprise. We're in the middle of a staff meeting. So I see, Zenith replied, her melodic voice cool and precise. I received your requisition for additional specialized equipment for the educational facilities. It exceeds your allocated budget by 17%. Miles nodded. The equipment is necessary to accommodate the learning needs of our expanded population. I've come to inform you that your requisition has been approved, Zenith said, causing a ripple of surprise through the room. And to deliver this, she placed a crystalline data chip on the table. The Galactic Union Council has officially recognized the Nexus Specialized Care Unit as a model program. They are implementing similar units at orphanages throughout Union space, using your protocols and designs as templates. Miles stared at the data chip, momentarily speechless. Zenith continued, her tone unchanging but her crystalline features shifting slightly in the light. I have also been instructed to offer you a position on the Union's Orphan Care Standards Committee. Your unconventional approach has apparently impressed certain influential members of the Council. The room remained silent as everyone processed this unexpected development. Miles finally found his voice. Thank you, Administrator. I'm honored by the recognition, but my place is here with the children. Zenith's crystalline features registered something that might have been respect. The position would not require you to leave Nexus. You would continue your work here while advising the committee remotely. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Supervisor Harper. The Council specifically cited your work with the Aquilian child as the catalyst for this policy change. It seems your act of insubordination has had far-reaching consequences. After Zenith departed, the meeting room erupted in excited conversation. Miles sat back, still processing the implications. Professor Telex cleared his throat, the clicking of his exoskeleton subsiding. It appears I may have been premature in my assessment, he said carefully. Perhaps there is more to learn about the capabilities of these children than I had considered. Miles nodded, accepting the closest thing to an apology he was likely to get from the proud Centaurian. We're all learning here, Professor. That's the point. That evening, after sharing the news with the children, Miles found himself once again sitting beside Naya's pool. She was practicing complex mathematical equations, creating glowing patterns on her skin that represented the solutions. Miles, she said suddenly, what happens when I grow up? Will I have to leave? The question caught him off guard. Well, eventually, yes. All the children leave the orphanage when they reach maturity. But that's many years away for you. Naya's skin dimmed slightly. But where will I go? There are no other Aquilians here. My colony is gone. Miles felt his heart constrict. It was a question he had avoided thinking about. Nexus Station had no permanent Aquilian residents, and the nearest Aquilian settlement was several systems away. We'll figure it out together, he promised. Maybe by then, there will be more options. The galaxy is always changing. Naya seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her equations. Miles watched her, marveling at how far they had both come from that first night in the storage room. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the specialized care unit. Miles was reviewing curriculum adjustments when his office door chimed. Enter, he called, not looking up from his work. Supervisor Harper, said a melodic voice that caused him to snap to attention. Overseer Blake stood in the doorway, accompanied by a tall, slender being unlike any Miles had seen before. The stranger had pale blue skin with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change, reminiscent of Naya's luminescence, but more subtle. Their eyes were large and entirely silver, reflecting the light like mirrors. Overseer Blake, Miles greeted, standing quickly. This is an unexpected honor. Blake smiled. I've brought someone who has traveled a considerable distance to meet you in one of your charges. The blue-skinned being stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Miles of water flowing. I am Ambassador Thalassa of the Aquilian High Council, they said, their voice carrying the same water-over-stones quality as Naya's. I have come regarding the child survivor from Nexus 9. Miles felt a protective instinct rise within him. Naya? Is there a problem? Quite the contrary, Ambassador Thalassa replied. News of your care for an Aquilian child has reached our homeworld. It is unprecedented. No non-Aquilian has ever successfully created a suitable environment for one of our young. It was necessary, Miles said simply. The ambassador's silver eyes studied him intently. Necessity often reveals character, Supervisor Harper. Your actions have opened a diplomatic channel that might not otherwise have existed. The Aquilian High Council has historically been reluctant to engage deeply with the Galactic Union. Overseer Blake stepped forward. What the ambassador is saying, Miles, is that your compassion for one child may have diplomatic implications that extend far beyond this orphanage. Miles shook his head. I wasn't thinking about diplomacy. I was thinking about a child who needed help. Precisely, Ambassador Thalassa said, their skin patterns shifting to a configuration that suggested approval. May I meet her? Miles led them to the educational center where Naya was working with the other children. When she saw Miles enter with the visitors, she froze, her skin pulsing with rapid patterns of surprise and wonder. An elder, she whispered, rising from her seat. She approached Ambassador Thalassa and performed a complex gesture with her webbed hands that Miles had never seen before. The ambassador responded with a similar gesture, then spoke to Naya in a language that sounded like rushing water and musical tones. Naya responded hesitantly in the same language, her skills clearly rusty from disuse. After a moment, the ambassador switched back to the common language. You have adapted well, young one. Your skin speaks of health and happiness. Naya glanced at Miles. I have a good home here. Miles made it for me. Ambassador Thalassa nodded. So I have heard. It is why I have come. They turned to Miles. The Aquilian High Council wishes to establish a permanent cultural mission on Nexus Station. We would bring a small delegation of our people to create a proper community here. Naya would no longer be alone. Miles felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy for Naya, who would have connections to her heritage, and a selfish sadness at the thought of her having less need for him. That sounds wonderful, he said, meaning it despite his conflicted feelings. Naya's skin suddenly pulsed with anxiety. She moved to Miles's side and took his hand. I stay with Miles, she said firmly to the ambassador. He is my family now. Ambassador Thalassa's silver eyes widened slightly, and their skin patterns shifted again. Of course, young one. The cultural mission would not separate you from your chosen family. Rather, It would expand your connections while allowing you to maintain your current bonds. Miles squeezed Naya's hand reassuringly. It's all right, Starfish. No one's taking you away. The ambassador watched their interaction with evident fascination. In our culture, we believe that bonds formed through choice are as sacred as those formed through birth. You have chosen each other as family, and we honor that choice. Later, after the ambassador and Overseer Blake had departed with plans to return the following week, Miles and Naya sat together in the quiet of her quarters. The day's events had left them both emotionally drained but hopeful. Will you like having other Aquilians here? Miles asked. Naya considered the question, her skin rippling thoughtfully. Yes, she finally said. But they are not you. Miles smiled. And they never will be. Just like I'll never be Aquilian. But that's the beauty of family. Naya, it doesn't have to be all one thing. It can be a mixture, growing and changing as we do. Naya's skin brightened. Like the specialized care unit. Different species, one family. Exactly, Miles agreed. 3 months later, the Aquilian Cultural Mission was fully established on Nexus Station. A small community of 20 Aquilians now occupied a newly constructed habitat adjacent to the orphanage, connected directly to the specialized care unit. Naya spent part of each day there, learning about her heritage and culture, but always returned to her quarters in the unit, to Miles and the family they had built together. The orphanage itself had changed too. Administrator Zenith, perhaps influenced by the union's recognition of the specialized care unit, had begun implementing some of Miles's more compassionate approaches throughout the facility. The rigid separation of species remained necessary for biological reasons, but more emphasis was now placed on social integration and individual development rather than optimal pathways. On the anniversary of Naya's arrival, the entire specialized care unit gathered for a celebration. The room was filled with children and staff of dozens of species, each unique in their biology, but united in purpose. The Lemurian twins performed a light-based dance, their bodies creating spectacular patterns in the air. The young Draconis, now nearly a meter tall, demonstrated careful control of their flame breath by lighting a ceremonial candle. The Sylvan child had grown a crown of luminous flowers specifically for the occasion. Miles watched it all with a full heart, standing beside Cora and the newer staff members who had come to believe in their mission. At the center of it all was Naya, her green skin glowing brilliantly as she moved between guests, her confidence and joy evident in every movement. Ambassador Thalassa approached Miles, their silver eyes reflecting the celebration lights. You have created something remarkable here, Supervisor Harper. Miles shook his head. We all created it together. I just built the first bed. Sometimes, the ambassador said, that is all it takes to change the universe. One person willing to build something when everyone else says no. As the celebration continued around them, Miles thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A decommissioned ship, a janitor position, a chance encounter in a corridor, and a decision to break the rules for the right reason. One small act of compassion had rippled outward, touching lives across the station and beyond. Naya appeared at his side, taking his hand in her familiar webbed grip. Happy Family Day, she said, her skin pulsing with patterns that Miles now recognized as love. Happy Family Day, Starfish, he replied. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had built together, a family that defied categories and crossed species boundaries, Miles Harper, once a simple janitor who had lost everything, knew he had found his place in the vast universe. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through one simple choice to see possibility where others saw only problems, to build a bed in a storage room when an entire system had failed a child in need. Sometimes, that was all it took to change the stars. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.